Woo!
This is awesome. I'm so glad we went. Didn't go to work. We'd be sitting there going, God, we should have gone fishing.
Hey, welcome everybody to the Salty Yak podcast. We are here with Heath Hipple, Mr. Bugs Lures. Welcome, Heath.
Thanks for having me, Kerry.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. We're going to just start off like I start off most of the interviews. Tell me your first memory of fishing.
Well, I grew up in Texas in the Houston area, and my dad grew up in a little town in East Texas called Teague, Texas, and it's halfway between here and Dallas. And so there are some lakes around there that he used to take me fishing, and he started me with worms and a bobber for bluegill, but he put a push button rod, like a kind of a Zebco, in my hand, probably when I was 6 or 7, and had me fish with lures. And so he quickly graduated me to lures, and then graduated me to a bait cast, a few years after that.
So start off pond fishing.
Pond fishing, bass and bluegill.
Bass, bluegill, catfish, whatever was in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly how I started, just growing up with Dad and doing that. Of course, we're kayak fishing, being the Salty Yak.
Right.
So tell me about how you went and how you started kayak fishing.
So I got married, and I have this reference of my marriage because that's when I started kayak fishing soon after. No correlation. I have a great marriage. So in around Christmas time of 2003, my buddy and I bought Tarpon 140s. And then January of 2004, I took my first saltwater kayak fishing trip. We fished in Jones Lake, right there, where you would launch from Louis Bait Camp, in that big body of water right near the what's that thing
causeway.
called? The causeway.
Yeah.
So fished in Jones. My buddy caught 3 keeper redfish. I caught 2, and it was a great introduction to saltwater kayak fishing.
And then we talked about this before we turned it on. So you kayak fished for a number of years.
Yes.
And then just life decided, hey, didn't need a kayak anymore.
Well, life decided that I couldn't go very often.
Yeah.
And about that time, I had, I get invites from different people, and so my kayak just sat there.
Yeah.
And so I sold it. I had 2, and one at a time, but 2 over the years, and so I sold them, and and now I fish. I told you earlier, I fished with Jared Esley sometimes, and he provides the kayaks, which is a beautiful thing.
There's nothing better than a buddy with a boat.
100%.
If you don't have to own it, and I've got a buddy that I fish with whenever we can. We go offshore. He's got an offshore boat. That's a neat thing to have, as a buddy with a boat that's willing to let you go with him whenever he wants to go.
As long as he maintains it.
Yeah, my buddy does an excellent job. But
there you go.
He said, Jared, he provides you with a kayak.
Show up and fish.
There you go.
Yeah.
Bring your rod, bring your stuff,
that's right.
and come fish.
Right.
Cannot beat friends like that.
Exactly.
Your wife she must have been pretty, she was pretty nice to let you buy a kayak, right after you got married.
Well, we didn't have kids yet, and so that's what, and she's a nurse, and she was working at Herman Hospital, and so we were 2 incomes, and
that's the time if you're gonna buy a boat, or
that's exactly
get
right.
it when you're single, or get it early in the marriage, because like we were talking about kids, because once the kids come along, the whole priority changes. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. So you're telling me that your oldest one was 14?
Yes, I have two girls and 2 boys. The girls are 14 and 12, and the boys are 10 and 6.
They into fishing?
Everybody is going to learn, and so they all fish, and whether or not they, fish as an adult or when they grow up is kind of up to them. But they're all learning.
Yeah, my oldest boy, Christopher. Yeah, he could take it or leave it.
Right.
But my youngest boy, Nicholas, he's got the carry gene, because I will fish, and he's got the carry gene. He likes to go fishing.
See, I have one brother who's 4 years younger, and he could take it or leave it for a long time. But then later in life he got into fly fishing, and that's kind of right up his alley, and so he's into it.
Yeah.
he's into it now.
Yeah, that's and we're going to get here in a minute. Is the fly fishing. I love to bow hunt, and I've bow hunted for years. And people, it's it was more of a challenge for hunting.
Yes.
But I have picked up a fly. My youngest one had a fly rod, and I picked it up a couple times at the pond playing with it. But I hadn't caught that bug yet, and I don't know that I want to catch that bug. But it's just more of a challenge. And
it is, and bow hunt. That's a good analogy. Yeah. Bow hunting to hunting. With rifles. Fly fishing.
Fly fishing to fishing.
Yeah.
So we're talking about how the bugs came along. So tell me the progression and how that whole story.
Sure. So I grew up here, mostly bass fishing, a little bit of saltwater fishing, always conventional rods, bait cast gear. Right after college, I moved to Colorado, and I worked in a fly shop up there. And so I learned how to fly fish and tie flies. And so I really got to enjoy catching fish on flies that I tied myself. Mm-hmm. And so I describe it, it's like, catching a fish is like ice cream. Catching a fish on something that you tied yourself, it's like sprinkles on ice cream. So I really, really enjoyed that. And then when I moved back to Texas, I wanted to continue doing that. And so I learned how to tie flies for bass and then for redfish. And I did that. I caught bass, bluegill, redfish, other saltwater species with a fly rod. But I'm a better fisherman with bait cast and spinning gear. And so I don't live at the coast. I don't get to fish all the time. And so when I get to go out there, I want to, with lures, I want to fish the most effective way that I can and maximize my time. Mm-hmm. And so that is, that's with a bait caster spinning gear. And so, but I still want to be able to tie. So I, over the years figured out ways to tie stuff on jig heads and using other weights that I could fish with my regular rods and reels.
Mm-hmm. So that's how it all kind of came about.
That's the idea. And then the company, I started the business back in 2008, 2009. The job I was working was dying a slow death right in front of my eyes, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And so to kind of, it's something to kind of, I'm trying to say, I didn't really think that I would be able to make a living with a fishing lure business, but it sounded fun, and I didn't know what else I was going to do. So I started kind of, putting my time into that, so I didn't have to think about my job that was going away. And so I started doing research on that, and I kind of crystallized my idea back in 2009, and then 2008. And so because there's a lot of planning that goes into this. And so crystallized my idea about 2008, and I ended up selling my first bug at the Houston Fishing Show in 2010. I got that right. Sorry, 2010. And I ended up going to work for my dad the following month, and as a manufacturer's rep for a boot company. So I sell boots to Western stores, and I still do that today. That pays the bills and takes the pressure off the bug business, so I can reinvest and grow it.
Exactly. So I was reading on the website, did you win a fly tying contest with one of the lures?
I entered.
You entered, okay.
A fly tying contest, and it was fun. It was a redfish fly.
Yeah.
I caught fish on it. It worked. It had a little rabbit on it, just like all my others. But like I said, I'm competitive, and I'm, I like the creative process, and so that's what caused me to enter. But I didn't win.
I told you when we were talking before you turned the mic on that I just assumed that you were fly fishing was your go-to, and then
no.
Yeah, I'm like you. I'm 99% of the time I'm an artificial fisherman, and that's just the way I like to catch them. I like to fool them and catch them that way. And I was telling you about my youngest son being the fisher. He's got the carry gene.
Yep.
When we took him to pack, I gave him I gave him a paddle tail to fish with.
Yep.
And then I gave him the double curl bugs
The curl-tail jig.
Yeah,
Yep.
in the blue crab.
Yep.
And he sight casted his first red with that.
That's awesome.
There he was like yeah. That's all I want to move to the coast, and that's all I want to do now.
That's awesome.
Is sight cast them. So
Yeah.
absolutely hooked on. So you're making them, and I've heard people talk about this before, but explain the rabbit hair.
Maybe what you read on my website is a story about the rabbit or the double bunny.
I read that one too.
I'll tell the story. So
Okay.
there's a fly fishing competition called the Jackson Hole One Fly.
Okay.
And so it's just like it sounds. It's in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and you get to use one fly to fly fish all day, and it's a combination of the number of fish, the length, So
wow.
it's a one fly competition. Yeah, it's cool. So when I was working up in Colorado, I read about it, and in the mid '90s, a gentleman used what's called a double bunny fly, and so all bugs are tied with rabbit strips.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the hide of a rabbit that is dyed a certain color and then cut into strips. And a double bunny is a bait fish pattern, and it has a strip on top and a strip on bottom, and they're glued together with this special glue, and it looks like a bait fish. And this guy, he used a double bunny, and I think he won this Jackson Hole One Fly 3 years in a row.
Wow.
And after that, they started changing the rules so that he wouldn't be able to use this kind of fly. And so, that's a real life. A real life. This we heard growing up. This lure's banned in 3 states. And you know what I mean? And so that kind of intrigued me. And so I started looking into rabbit. And so it's a natural material. It's a rabbit hide. It's really durable because it's the hide is attached to the hairs. It's the hide of the animal. So it's leather. It's really durable, and it's just tons of movement in the water. It just looks alive.
Even when it sits still.
Even when it sits still.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so the drawback as far as tying flies with rabbit is that hide gets wet. It soaks up water. And so it makes flies heavier. And you want to do everything you can to avoid making a fly heavier because it's harder to cast.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're tying a fly and you're using rabbit, you try to minimize the amount of rabbit so it doesn't make your fly so heavy. But with a jig, with a bug, gives it a little extra weight. It's no issue.
So the bugs that I have, just
Yep.
a little side note here. The bugs that I have, when I fish with them for the day, and I get home with them, how should I take care of them?
So what you want to do, you want to rinse them with fresh water.
Mm-hmm.
Take them to the sink.
Yeah.
Rinse them with fresh water. Squeeze out the excess water with your fingers,
Mm-hmm.
and then set them. I put a paper towel down, set them beside the sink, and let them fully dry overnight. However long it takes, they need to be fully dry, and then it'll look like they have bedhead or something.
Yeah.
The hair will look funny, but when you put it back in the water, it'll look alive again. It'll look the same.
So I don't need to get the wife's hair dryer and.
No, but you need to make sure
They're dry.
They're dry before you put them in your tackle box, and the hide takes a little bit longer to dry.
Okay. Cool.
Because if you put them up wet,
Well, I always wash my stuff when I get home, but I just wondered. I was like, because they do look after you've used them once,
Yep.
and I know when I put it back in the water, I'm like, oh, it looks exactly like it did when I bought it now. So
But it doesn't look as pretty as when it came out of the package.
true. So,
Right.
But it still works.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about the different lures that you're making.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to back up a little bit because we talked about this too. When I first started following you, I noticed you had YouTube videos out where you were showing people how to exactly tie, a lot of the jigs and stuff that you're selling.
Yes.
And my first thought was, I don't know if that's a good idea, but you explained it to me again and how it makes perfect sense for you.
Sure. Well, there's two explanations. So I love to tie my own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I told you this. When I was fly fishing, somebody would hand me a fly and they'd say, "Hey, I think this will work. Go try this." I would not fish that fly. I would tie my own because I want to get the satisfaction.
One that looked just like it.
or close.
Or close, okay.
You know, I'd use it as an idea. So I wanted to get the satisfaction of catching fish on something I tied myself. And so I know there are other people out there like me who want to tie their own. And so I make all the materials available that I use, and then on the tying videos, you know, if you want to tie it exactly like I do, you know, I'll show you how to do it. So not all the lures are. I don't have tying videos for everything, but I will eventually, and it's just a matter of time. There's no reason I don't. It's just kind of a process.
It's just time, right?
Right.
We got plenty of that, right?
And yeah,
Never,
exactly.
Never, always running out of time.
Right. And so if somebody, you know, like I said, that's how I am, and so I know there are people out there.
So if there's people that want to tie their own, or you know, or give it a little customization or whatever, they can do that because you sell all the pieces to do it.
Correct.
Or you can be like me, and I just buy them straight from you.
Exactly.
You tie them for me, and I just go take them and go
whatever
fishing.
you'd like to do.
Exactly, that works for me. So really, what was the first one? What was your first production lure that you came out with?
So what I did, this is how. So my stuff is tied. You know, there's a hook and a weight component, and then the materials. And so the first, I had to develop my own jig head. And so what happened? I was in Fishing Tackle Unlimited, probably 07 or 08, and there is a little bonefish jig called a wiggle jig, and they had some hung up in the fly section of that store. And there was a guy working, and this is the store on 45 South. There was a guy named Andy Packmore in there that day, and I looked at that wiggle jig, and it's really, really simple little jig. And I said, "So Andy, do people use those for redfish?" And he said, "Yes." And so instantly my brain, you know, the wheel started turning. I said, "Well, how do you think that would look like with rabbit?" And he said, "I think that would look great." And so I set out to, you know, to test that hypothesis to see what would happen. And so I went looking for jig heads, and the style of jig head is most popular for bonefish, which bonefish and redfish are really similar. Bonefish are, you know, from Florida, kind of the southern Florida, south into the tropics, Bahamas, places like that. But just like redfish, they have an inferior mouth. Their mouth is on the bottom of their head. They cruise in shallow water looking for bait fish, shrimp, and crabs to eat. Very, very similar. And so but they're smaller in general than redfish, and so people use smaller jigs. Yeah. And so it was a bonefish jig that I saw, that wiggle jig. And so I thought, well, let me try to make a beefed up version for redfish. And so I looked several places for a jig head on the market that I could use, and I didn't find anything that was any good. And so I started the process of trying to figure out how to get my own jig head designed and made. And that was a huge pain because I wanted what's called a hand mold. And that means, like, a mold consists of two pieces of bar stock aluminum that have, you know, you open it up, you put a hook in there, then you close it up, and it's machined to give the shape that you want, and you pour molten lead in the top. And then you make two jig heads at a time. But the deal is, the machine that makes that hand mold costs probably tens of thousands of dollars, and you're going to the guy that owns that machine, and you said, "Hey, make me this one this one mold, and by the way, I don't want to pay very much money for it." And so but finally, it was like pulling teeth, but I finally got a mold made. And so I started casting my own jig heads in my garage and powder painting them, which is pretty fun. And then so I had the jig head, and so I wanted to make so that's kind of the canvas. That's what you can create something, what you can tie on. And so I wanted to do a double bunny after the fly that I told you a story about. And that's just two pieces of rabbit, right on top of each other. And then I wanted to do something else, and I had tried several ways to get rabbit to move like a little grub, like a little, little soft plastic. And rabbit doesn't move in that way. It won't wiggle like that. And so I figured out a way to, tie rabbit on the front and then just a small jig, tie rabbit on the front and then put a little curl-tail grub on the back. And so that was the extent of my ideas. That was my big idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I started with, and that's what I offered for sale at the fishing show back in March of 2010. I offered double bunnies and curl-tail jigs.
Yeah. And then you came up with a second generation of the curl tail, and is it just the split tail?
After several years, I thought, how do I improve upon this? And so I used and over the years people had asked if I could put rattles and stuff, and so I figured out a way to put a rattle on the bottom, and then I found the same company that makes the little grubs I use. They make a double tail, and I figured it would give a little bit more flutter, a little bit more action on the back, and so that became the second generation curl tail jig.
I didn't even think nothing about the rattle, but I know it's there.
Yeah.
Cool. So double tail, and we talked about double bunny. What's the difference in the Beastie Bug?
Two people, Thomas Barlow and Kaylin Barlow, they were early adopters of bugs, and they started catching fish on them immediately. They're really good fishermen. And so what they were doing, they wanted me to make them a bunch of curl tail jigs without the tail. And so a curl tail jig without the tail is just a piece of rabbit on top and then two pieces on the sides. And they didn't need the tail, and they were sight casting a bunch of redfish just with that jig like that. And so I thought, fly fishermen, when they go to the river or wherever they're fishing, they're trying to figure out what those fish are eating.
Yeah.
That's the first thing they want to do. And then that will help them choose what kind of fly.
They'll match the hatch.
Exactly, to match the hatch. And so, and then when you catch fish, you're on a fly, you're thinking, okay, did he eat that for a crab imitation? Meaning, did he think it was a crab? And so they were using the blue crab color, and they were fishing it without the tail. And so my mind thought, okay, well, they're probably, these redfish probably think it's a little crab. And that's how they're fishing it. And so because I love the creative process of designing jigs, designing bugs, I thought, how can I use this same jig head and tie a crab imitation? And so that's what I did. And it's a lot more intricate than the first two, but it was kind of a process it was a challenge, and it was kind of a process of, hey, let's try to figure this out. And I didn't think about it at the time, but that creative process has taught me over the years. I've gotten better. Yeah. Because a new challenge, and it just forces you to figure something out to improve your skills. And so I figured out how to incorporate some rubber legs. I incorporated some rabbit that would make it look like claws. And so so that's how the Beastie Bug.
So the Beastie Bug is more of a crab imitation.
Exactly.
Perfect.
And so I would call it the double bunny. Has a slimmer profile similar to a shrimp or a little bait fish you would find on bumping along the bottom like a mudman or something. The Beastie Bug is a crab imitation, and I think the curl tail kind of looks like a lot of different things.
I think so.
That they would eat.
That's been my go-to so far for sight casting fish. That's my go-to. Depending on water clarity is usually if I could see him, I like that blue crab. I love that blue crab. But if the water's if I'm not seeing the fish, but I see where he's chasing bait, then that black and gold. Because up here where we're fishing, Galveston, I fish a lot out of Freeport. And the water's a little muddy. So use the darker ones. And,
same. And so, what did you just make? I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Go ahead, keep going. It'll come to me in a second.
Because you showed me the difference between the Hydra Bug. So let's talk about the Hydra Bug a little bit, because we were talking about the difference between that one and the double bunny.
Sure. So, like sight casters, kayak fishermen, people chasing redfish were my early adopters, they're still my best customers.
Yeah.
I have a curiosity about catching other fish.
Mhm.
I want to catch 50 different kinds of fish
Yeah.
on bugs. And so I said, let me try to come up with something for trout fishermen, like more of a bait fish pattern and something that, would kind of dive. And so that's how the Hydra Bug came into being. I designed a totally new jig head. I used to offer it in just 1/4 ounce, and I'll update that in a minute, but it had a bait fish profile. It had a combination of rabbit and a silicone skirt, and it had a long grub on the back. So it was 4.5, 5 inches long. And I thought, this is what, this will catch trout.
Yeah.
Because I want to see what would happen. And so it did catch trout, but what my redfish customers did, they would take it in really, really murky water,
Mm-hmm.
and there were double rattles on the Hydra Bug. And so a buddy of mine named Sonny Mills, I don't know if he's kind of the OG of the kayak fishing world here in the Galveston area.
Okay.
Really good guy, really good fisherman, and he still does tournaments. So I gave Sonny a bunch of those Hydra Bugs, and thinking like, okay, he's going to go catch trout on them and get back to me. Well, he went and sight casted a limit of redfish with the Hydra Bugs. And I said, well, what did you do that for?
I wanted you to catch trout.
Yeah, exactly. And so since then, I've learned that there's a lot of uses for something like that for redfish, and kind of similar to what I told you earlier. Jared Esley took me fishing a couple of years ago in the winter, and we were fishing a cut that was probably 4 or 5 feet deep. There was some current coming through, and we needed something that would get down.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also murky, and so, bigger profile baits with rattles, easier for fish to find in murky water. And so it's it's proven useful for a lot of different species.
Well, and they all imitate bait, and
Right.
that's whatever you're fishing for. I'm sure there's lots of bass fishermen that use your stuff,
For sure.
because it looks real. When you put it in the water, it looks real. So that's the go-to. Let's talk about hothead and what's the other one? Bitsy bug.
So I've been selling the curl tails and the double bunnies and then the beastie bugs for a couple years.
Mm-hmm.
And people that fish for bonefish came to me and said, hey, I want to take, these look like bonefish jigs. I want to, take them on my trips. And so they would normally take the double bunny because that's what looks the most similar to what their bonefish jigs look like.
Mm-hmm.
And they said they'd catch 1 or 2 on their trip, but they'd say, hey, they're just too big for the bonefish to eat, because the hooks on the curl tails are 2/0, 3/0, and 4/0.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, why don't I design a bonefish jig head? And so, by this time I had a lot easier way to make jig heads, thank the Lord. And so I designed just a smaller version, a downsized version of the redfish jig head, and on a size 2 hook and a size 1 hook. So just small.
Just small, yeah.
Yeah. And so the hothead bug is the first bonefish jig I designed. It's a shrimp imitation. It has an accent piece of rabbit right at the eyes. That's why it's called a hothead. And it's still my best-selling bonefish jig to this day.
Wow.
And then the bitty bug it's a very small crab imitation.
Oh, okay.
And so there's a popular bonefish fly called bonefish bitters, and it's a small crab imitation. And a lot of my inspiration comes from flies, especially for bonefish. And so that's why. So the bonefish bitters fly, there was inspiration. So I called it the bitty bug.
Oh, there you
kind
go.
of a, props to the guy that designed that.
Yeah, when I look at it, I don't know why, but now it's neat to know the story behind the name of it.
Yeah. And so the hothead and the bitty, you're probably familiar with those because when I came out with those bonefish jigs, redfish guys said, "Oh wow, I'm gonna go sight cast redfish with these," because redfish sometimes they eat small stuff, and so And so they're very effective in skinny water, and then when fish are chasing small bait.
That's what Rex, one of his tips he gave me was that when you're sight fishing them, and for whatever reason they're finicky, just go as small as you can go. And he said that's what he went to.
Yep.
It was either a hothead or a bitty bug, and he goes, and usually that's what works. I mean, it would be enough to turn them on to catch them when they wouldn't hit something bigger.
Sure.
So.
Oh, exactly. I mean, and that, if you think about it, if redfish are chasing small bait, you'll have a better chance of getting bit if you throw something at them that matches the kind of profile that they're
looking for.
And and so it just makes
it easy.
sense.
Yeah. Do what's going to. Obviously, we all want to catch more fish.
100%.
So whatever it takes to catch more fish. Let's talk about the new one.
Okay.
The clickbait. Or I guess the clickbait's not the new one, but let's talk about the clickbait shrimp.
Sure. So my brother's a fly fisherman, and he was going to come down to Texas and me and my dad and my brother were going to fish together, and he was going to try and catch his first redfish on a fly. And so I wanted to tie something for him to use. A fly had become popular back then called an Avalon fly. And it became popular because people would fish for permit, and permit would eat this fly. Permit is it's a member of the jack family, and it's found in the same waters that you would find bonefish. And so people that go on bonefish trips will often try to fish for permit. But they're really hard to fool with a fly or an artificial. And so this guy developed what's called an Avalon fly. He wanted it to look like a shrimp, and it had a piece of monofilament on the bottom of the fly with these stainless steel beads. And it would do two things. It would make a little click when he twitched the fly, and it would also help the fly swim correctly, kind of act as a keel.
Yeah.
And so, but when you look, if I put the fly in your hand, it doesn't look like a shrimp. And who cares really if the fish will eat it? If a permit will eat it, you don't care what it looks like.
Yeah.
But so I said, okay, I'm gonna try to design a shrimp fly for my brother using those beads, and I'm gonna make it look more like a shrimp, or what in my opinion. And so that's what I did, and with beads on the bottom. And so I designed the fly version, but then I designed the lure version as well.
Yeah.
And I developed these weights called belly weights. I showed you earlier.
You did.
Kind of like shaped like half a football with a groove in it. You can tie it to a hook shank. And so that trip was successful. My brother Jay caught his first 2 redfish on the fly that I tied him. So that was
very cool,
very satisfying for me. And so the clickbait is a small shrimp imitation, but it's super weedless. It's more weedless than the hothead bug and the bitty bug, because it's it's just tied differently, and it's more a lower profile, and it's just more weedless. And so when redfish, flounder, trout, whatever, are chasing small shrimp in grass, it's very useful. And a lot of people lately, like in the past couple weeks, have been catching fish on clickbait because they're chasing small shrimp in the marsh.
Yeah. Didn't think about it being weedless.
Yeah.
Just kind of we fished Port Manfield back in June. We went down there. Took some of those kids I was telling you about. We went down there, and it would have been nice to have something that was a little bit weedless down there. So let's talk about the new one that you got here on your fly tying stand.
So the clickbait shrimp. I developed that, and so I know that sometimes fish eat small shrimp, but sometimes they eat little minnows, little glass minnows, or little shad. And so I took the same concept as a clickbait shrimp, but tied it to look like a bait fish. I used the same hook, the same weights, and that same monofilament on the bottom with the beads, and
it looks pretty bait fishy.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And so this is I'll get to kind of explain the process of designing a new bug.
Yeah.
And so the idea will come to me, and I will start tying them here, right here at this desk. And I'll kind of work out the kinks in the pattern. And so, but before I get some made, I will tie some and use them myself and give them or sell them to people so they can test them for me. And so I'm in that process right now with this clickbait minnow, tying some here and there so people can test them. So they work. I've gotten really good feedback on them, but but right now I have to use wisdom and figure out when I'm going to put them into production, because I showed you earlier the second generation Hydra-Bug.
Yeah.
That's what I'm committed to having ready for the fishing show.
Oh, okay.
In March of 2020, and you can kind of see the process, because I sent those materials off today.
Yeah.
And here we are in September, and so there's a lot of planning and a process that goes into getting new bait made, and it starts months in advance.
So the second generation Hydra-Bug, when's it going to be available for people to purchase online?
Lord willing, like March of 2020.
Okay.
So
look for it to come out around then.
Yeah, and so it's a big bait fish pattern, a big bait for big fish. And I showed you the prototype earlier. So I figured out a way to tie more rabbit, to give it bulk. It's going to have double rattles, the same as the old Hydra-Bug, but it's going to have shoulders. It's going to be a bigger profile. It's also going to be, the jig head weight is going to be 1/4 ounce and then 3/8 and half. And so you're going to be able to get really long casts, and then you're going to be able to fish a little bit deeper water if your fish are deeper.
I just had a thought on those. The last couple times we've been offshore, I told you I had the best thing is a buddy with a boat.
Yep.
I bet those would be great on mahi-mahi.
So
just a thought.
Yeah. Well, and when I've shown people prototypes, they've said, I want to cast these at cobia too.
Oh, I imagine. Yeah.
And
so something like that would work great.
And that's part of I like telling hold on. Let me collect myself. Let me collect my words. So I like telling people yes. If they say, hey, do you have something for mahi-mahi? Do you have something for cobia? Do you have something for pike? Do you have something for largemouth? I love to tell people yes, because when somebody catches a fish on a bug, I feel like I was there myself a little bit. And so I've never caught a cobia. It's on my list. I really want to. But if I give you one and next summer you go catch a cobia on that new Hydra-Bug, I'll feel like I'm part of the way there.
There you go.
If that makes sense.
Exactly.
And so back when I did the old Hydra-Bugs only came in 1/4 ounce. But people caught peacock bass, people caught jacks, people caught barracuda, largemouth, speckled trout, flounder, redfish. And so I'm hoping, and probably snook too. Snook too. And so I'm hoping that 3/8 and half, it'll be more effective for those, for some of those species that are in deeper water.
Wow.
And so I'm excited about it.
I got you a little excited there for a second, didn't I?
Well, and the other cool thing, I got to know Mike Bossy of Down South Lures. I've, working the fishing show for as long as I have, I've gotten to know him a little bit, and he's always struck me as a good guy. And I showed him. I put an old Hydra-Bug in his hands one time and said, hey, how do you think your Down South lure would look on the back of this? But when we rigged it up, it was a little long. It did, profile was just a little off, in my opinion, his opinion too. And so when I started redesigning the Hydra-Bug, I texted him and I said, hey, I'm redesigning this bait. Do you have something, that will work? And he said, well, as a matter of fact, I've designed a new Down South soft plastic. It's called a burner shad, and it's going to be a shorter version of the normal Down South lures. And he sent me prototypes of them. So he's going to start selling them in January of 2020, this coming January at the boat show. but he sent me prototypes a couple of months ago, so I could start, so I could, as I'm designing my bait, I could design them around his soft plastic. Number one, that was really cool of him to do, because he knows me a little bit.
Yeah.
I know him a little bit, and he sent me prototypes of a bait that's, it's not out there, nobody's seen it, and so I thought that was really awesome. But number two, it fits really well on the jig.
It does.
And so the other thing I did, and I didn't get to tell you about this earlier, I took all those prototype patterns, all those colors that I showed you in there, and I met with Mike about a month ago, something like that, about a month ago, and so we looked at all his colors and kind of several, like most of them, like he has popular colors that are going to match up perfectly with the hydrobugs, but there's a couple that he didn't have exact matches, and so he's going to develop 2 colors specifically. I mean, he's going to sell them himself, but at my request, he's going to develop 2 new colors that will match with those hydrobugs, and so I thought that was super cool.
Very cool. Very cool that y'all reached out and you were able to come together like that.
Yeah, collaboration. And he was happy to do it. I was ecstatic. I was
like I told you before, that if I'm trying to catch trout, then I'm using a soft plastic.
Yep.
Down south, that's what I go with. That's what I like.
It's the best selling soft plastic in Texas.
Yeah.
For saltwater fishermen. And this new one, so just like his bigger ones, they swim on the fall. That's his deal. This is going to be the same way. And the prototype I showed you in there, so I tested that on my jig, and he tested it too, and it didn't swim well enough. And so he redid his mold, and he made the tail a little bit thinner, and so it's going to swim on the fall down, at the lightest jig head that you want to use, 16th, 32nd ounce. And so it's going to be just like his others. It's going to swim on the fall. And
we'll see those in March.
Lord willing, yes.
Lord willing, the creek don't rise.
That's right.
So let's talk about the light kit.
Yes.
Or can we talk about the light kit?
No, I hesitated because it's not something that, those will be in production, So here. So the light kit is for fishing the lights. Consists of 3 different baits. Flats bug. Which is I have now. It's the little brother of the curl-tail jig. Imitates a lot of different things. The second one is the clickbait shrimp, which is in production, imitates a small shrimp. The third one is the clickbait minnow.
Okay.
So the complete light kits will be ready next year at some point when the clickbait minnows get into production. And so that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm tying up some as people buy those light kits so they can test them for me, but I can't do a ton of them.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So sounds like I need to buy some clickbait shrimp then. You got any tips for sight casting your lures or fishing your lures in general?
Sure. First thing you need to do, you tie it on, then you hold it under the water and squeeze the rabbit strips between your fingers, because the hide holds little air pockets. And so the hide needs to be wet before the lure really comes alive. And so it will get that way after 6 or 8 or 10 casts, but I want mine to look alive like from
First
the
cast.
get. Exactly. And so if you do this for about 5 or 10 seconds, you'll see that little air bubbles come out, and you only have to do it once. And so that's the first thing you have to do. And then, I'm a decent fisherman, but just get it in front of them.
Yeah.
One thing, so with the curl-tail jigs, the double bunnies, the beastie bugs, the hothead bugs, all those tied on that arrowhead shape, that flat jig head, those will all land hook point up every single time. And so if you have a sandy or muddy or a mildly grassy bottom, you can cast your bug and let it sink all the way to the bottom, and it'll sit hook point up, and even when it's just sitting there, it'll look alive. And so you can just let it sit there. The fish might pick it up. You can just twitch it just slightly or move it just slightly, and it'll kind of scoot along the bottom. And sometimes that's a key, because it'll kick up a little puff of sand or mud, and it'll look like something's trying to escape.
Yeah.
And so, or you can bump it along the bottom.
Yeah.
But get it in front. Get it in front of them.
Get it in front of them.
And get it wet before you cast it.
Yeah, that's the hot tip right there.
Well,
That's the hot tip right there.
so I spend a lot more time, designing baits and managing the business, and I fish when I can.
Yeah, I understand that.
Hold on.
Go ahead.
Actually, one more. Jared Esley
Mhm.
taught me something. When casting to a school of fish, like a feeding school, I used to make a cast in there and work the lure back to me with twitches, like
Mhm.
kind of like I'm blind casting. He taught me, cast it in there and just slowly bring it through the school, and your hookup ratio will be better
Like just on a steady retrieve.
on a steady retrieve. I think that's because it'll be easier for them to find the bait, because it's already kind of chaotic in
Yeah.
there when they're feeding like that. And if you're bringing it through there and twitching it, they might have, So that was that's something he taught me. It worked.
And it works.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Cool.
don't worry about giving it a bunch of twitches if you're casting in a school of fish. Just bring it, steady retrieve through there.
Just bring them through it. And then, of course, wash them with fresh water and dry them when you get done with them
Exactly.
before you throw them back
And
in.
rinse them out with fresh water, just like I said, and then squeeze the excess water out of the rabbit strips, and then let them dry till they're completely dry.
Can you think of anything that we missed? Anything else you want to talk about?
I enjoy interacting with people, helping people pick out bugs. If this one of the things, this clickbait minnow, it's coming into existence because there's fish when they're chasing little glass minnows. I didn't
Mhm.
have anything
Yeah.
that imitated a little glass.
I told you.
minnow. So
we talked about fishing. With me working night shift, we fish a lot at
Yeah.
night, and I've had that problem.
And so I really like helping people catch fish.
Yeah.
And if I don't have something, most likely I'll have something that'll work. But if I don't, I'll tie something up
You
and
make something.
we'll figure out how to catch those fish. And so email me, reach out to me on social media, Instagram, Facebook. Like I said, I enjoy helping people catch fish.
So, what is your website if they want to buy some
It
bugs?
is bugsfishing.com, and bugs has 2 G's, so BUGGS, bugsfishing.com.
And I know I follow you on Instagram. What are you on? Is it same thing
Same.
on Instagram?
Same, and then same on Facebook. And my
So-
email is Heath, Heath, Heath at bugsfishing.com.
Heath, I certainly appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for having
I've
me.
enjoyed talking to you and getting to know you.
Thanks for having me, Kerry.
All right, y'all guys have tight lines, and as Ryan's not here to say it, so I'm going to say it for him. Wear your life jackets, guys, if you're out there kayak fishing. All right, we talk to y'all later.